But her writing has just found its way into the hands of almost every activist I respect at this point, and it has this quality of being kind of inspiring and clarifying, and yeah, I don't know. She exists at the intersection of all the different people who I have been close to in marginalized groups. She, there's certain things that my black radical friends don't always understand about my queer friends, and vice versa. She is sort of, for me, in the center of everybody, saying exactly what everybody needs to hear, wants to hear. She's incredible with language. She distills things well. It's plain language. It's not like inaccessible or dense or academic or any shit like that. So she speaks in a way that I understand and that I like and that I think more people should hear. I don't know if I need to do any like content warnings or anything in this one. Not that I'm aware of, anyway. I'm trying to remember how I do this now. I've got some water. I might not be as responsive to chat. That's right. This morning I was like, was I responsive to chat? Big head in the tube in Power Rangers. Power Rangers was a little after my time. Zordon, Zardoz, who was also a big head. But yeah, I don't remember if I'm supposed to do anything else. I might just get into it. I was going to play like low-key relaxing music underneath, but then I realized like I might fuck myself up with it being muted later on. So if you want to play some mellow jazz, you do that. You don't have to play mellow jazz, but if you want to add musical accompaniment, go right ahead. I'm going to do this a cappella. All right. Okay. Do I take my headphones off? Do I put the glasses on? Yeah. I can't hear anything you say now, but you can still talk to me in the chat. That's how text works. All right, here we go. All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. The first love letter I ever wrote was sent to you, just as this book was written to talk to you. Anthony, you have been my most intimate listener. I will love you always. In the Song of Solomon, there is this passage that reads, I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go. To holding on, to knowing again that moment of rapture, of recognition where we can face one another as we really are, stripped of artifice and pretense, naked and not ashamed. It's the dedication. Here's the preface. When I was a child, it was clear to me that life was not worth living if we did not know love. I wish I could testify that I came to this awareness because of the love I felt in my life, but it was love's absence that let me know how much love mattered. I was my father's first daughter. At the moment of my birth, I was looked upon with loving kindness, cherished and made to feel wanted on this earth and in my home. To this day, I cannot remember when that feeling of being loved left me. I just know that one day I was no longer precious. Those who had initially loved me well turned away. The absence of their recognition and regard pierced my heart and left me with a feeling of brokenheartedness so profound I was spellbound. Grief and sadness overwhelmed me. I did not know what I had done wrong, and nothing I tried made it right. No other connection healed the hurt of that first abandonment, that first banishment from love's paradise. For years I lived my life suspended, trapped by the past, unable to move into the future. Like every wounded child, I just wanted to turn back time and be in that paradise again, in that moment of remembered rapture where I felt loved, where I felt a sense of belonging. We can never go back. I know that now. We can go forward. We can find the love our hearts long for, but not until we let go grief about the love we lost long ago when we were little and had no voice to speak the heart's longing. All the years of my life, I thought I was searching for love I found, retrospectively, to to be years where I was simply trying to recover what had been lost, to return to the first home, to get back the rapture of first love. I was not really ready to love or be loved in the present. I was still mourning, clinging to the broken heart of girlhood, to broken connections. When that mourning ceased, I was able to love again. I awakened from my trance state and was stunned to find the world I was living in, the world of the present, was no longer a world open to love. And I noticed that all around me I heard testimony that lovelessness had become the order of the day. I feel our nations turning away from love as intensely as I felt love's abandonment in my girlhood. Turning away, we risk moving into a wilderness of spirit, so intense we may never find our way home again. I write of love to bear witness both to the danger in this movement and to call for a return to love. Redeemed and restored, love returns us to the promise of everlasting life. When we love, we can let our hearts speak. Introduction. Grace, touched by love. It is possible to speak with our heart directly. Most ancient cultures know this. We can actually converse with our heart as if it were a good friend. In modern life, we have become so busy with our daily affairs and thoughts that we have lost this essential art of taking time to converse with our heart. This was said by Jack Cornfield. On my kitchen wall hang 4 snapshots of graffiti art I first saw on construction walls as I walked to my teaching job at Yale University years ago. The declaration, quote, "The search for love continues even in the face of great odds," was painted in bright colors. At the time, recently separated from a partner of almost 15 years, I was often overwhelmed by grief so profound it seemed as though an immense sea of pain was washing my heart and soul away. Overcome by sensations of being pulled underwater, drowning, I was constantly searching for anchors to keep me afloat, to pull me back safely to the shore. The declaration on the construction walls with its childlike drawings of unidentifiable animals always lifted my spirits. Whenever I passed this site, the affirmation of love's possibilities sprawling across the block gave me hope. Signed with the first name of local artists, these works spoke to my heart. Reading them, I felt certain the artist was undergoing a crisis in his life, either already confronting loss or facing the possibility of loss. In my head, I engaged in imaginary conversations about the meaning of love with him. I told him how his playful graffiti art anchored me and helped restore my faith in love. I talked about the way this declaration, with its promise of a love waiting to be found, a love I could still hope for, lifted me out of the abyss I had fallen into. My grief was a heavy, despairing sadness caused by parting from a companion of many years, but, more important, it was a despair rooted in the fear that love did not exist, could not be found, and even if it were lurking somewhere, I might never know it in my lifetime. It had become hard for me to continue to believe in love's promise when everywhere I turned the enchantment of power or the terror of fear overshadowed the will to love. One day on my way to work, looking forward to the day's meditation on love that the sight of the graffiti art engendered, I was stunned to find that the construction company had painted over the picture with a white paint, so glaringly bright it was possible to see faint traces of the original art underneath. Upset that what had now become a ritual affirmation of love's grace was no longer there to welcome me, I told everyone of my disappointment. Finally, someone passed on the rumor that the graffiti art had been whitewashed because the words were a reference to individuals living with HIV and that the artist might be gay. Perhaps. It is just as likely that the men who splashed paint on the wall were threatened by this public confessing of a longing for love. A longing so intense it could not only be spoken but was deliberately searched for. After much searching, I located the artist and talked with him face to face about the meaning of love. We spoke about the way public art can be a vehicle for the sharing of life-affirming thoughts. And we both expressed our grief and annoyance that the construction company had so callously covered up a powerful message about love. To remind me of the construction walls, he gave me snapshots of the graffiti art. From the time we met, everywhere I have lived, I have placed these snapshots above my kitchen sink. Every day, when I drink water or take a dish from the cupboard, I stand before this reminder that we yearn for love, that we seek it, even when we lack hope that it really can be found. There are not many public discussions of love in our culture right now. At best, popular culture is the one domain in which our longing for love is talked about. Movies, music, magazines, and books are the place where we turn to hear our yearnings for love expressed. Yet the talk is not the life-affirming discourse of the 60s and 70s, which urged us to believe, quote, all you need is love. Nowadays, the most popular messages are those that declare the meaningless of love, its irrelevance. A glaring example of this cultural shift was the tremendous popularity of Tina Turner's song with the title boldly declaring, "What's love got to do with it?" I was saddened and appalled when I interviewed a well-known female rapper at least 20 years my junior who, when asked about love, responded with biting sarcasm, "Love, what's that? I have never had any love in my life." Youth culture today is cynical about love, and that cynicism has come from their pervasive feeling that love cannot be found. Expressing this concern in When All You've Ever Wanted Isn't Enough, Harold Kushner writes, "I am afraid that we may be raising a generation of young people who will grow up afraid to love, afraid to give themselves completely to another person, because they will have seen how much it hurts to take the risk of loving and have it not work out. I am afraid that they will grow up looking for intimacy without risk, for pleasure without significant emotional investment. They will be so fearful of the pain of disappointment that they will forego the possibilities of love and joy." Young people are cynical about love. Ultimately, cynicism is the great mask of the disappointed and betrayed heart. When I travel around the nation giving lectures about ending racism and sexism, audiences, especially young listeners, become agitated when I speak about the place of love in any movement for social justice. What's up, little shunts? Indeed, all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized the love ethic. Yet young listeners remain reluctant to embrace the idea of love as a transformative force. To them, love is for the naive, the weak, the hopelessly romantic. Their attitude is mirrored in the grown-ups they turn to for explanations. As spokesperson for a disillusioned generation, Elizabeth Wurtzel asserts in Bitch in Praise of Difficult Women, that's a title, "None of us are getting better at loving. We are getting more scared of it. We were not given good skills to begin with, and the choices we make have tended only to reinforce our sense that it is hopeless and useless." Her words echo all that I hear an older generation say about love. When I talked of love with my generation, I found it made everyone nervous or scared, especially when I spoke about not feeling loved enough. On several occasions, as I talked about love with friends, I was told I should consider seeing a therapist. I understood that a few friends were simply weary of my bringing up the topic of love and felt that if I saw a therapist, it would give them a break. But most folks were just frightened of what might be revealed in any exploration of the meaning of love in our lives. Yet whenever a single woman over 40 brings up the topic of love, again and again, the assumption, rooted in sexist thinking, is that she is, quote, desperate for a man. No one thinks she is simply passionately, intellectually interested in the subject matter. No one thinks she is rigorously engaged in a philosophical undertaking wherein she is endeavoring to understand the metaphysical meaning of love in everyday life. No, she is just seen as on the road to, quote, fatal attraction. Disappointment and a pervasive feeling of brokenheartedness led me to begin thinking more deeply about the meaning of love in our culture. My longing to find love did not make me lose my sense of reason or perspective. It gave me the incentive to think more, to talk about love, and to study popular and more serious writing on the subject. As I pored over nonfiction books on the subject of love, I was surprised to find that the vast majority of the, quote, revered books, ones used as reference works, and even those popular as self-help books, have been written by men. All my life I have thought of love as primarily a topic women contemplate with greater intensity and vigor than anybody else on the planet. I still hold this belief even though visionary female thinking on the subject has yet to be taken as seriously as the thoughts and writings of men. Men theorize about love, but women are more often love's practitioners. Most men feel that they receive love and therefore know what it feels like to be loved. Women often feel we are in a constant state of yearning, wanting love but not receiving it. In philosopher Jacob Needleman's primer, quote, title is A Little Book About Love, virtually all the major narratives of love he comments on are written by men. His list of significant references doesn't include books written by women. Throughout my graduate school training for a doctorate in literature, I can recall only one woman poet being extolled as a high priestess of love, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She was, however, considered a minor poet. Yet even the most non-literary student among us knew the opening line of her most well-known sonnet, "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." This was in pre-feminist days. In the wake of the contemporary feminist movement, the Greek poet Sappho has now become enshrined as another love goddess. Back then, in every creative writing course, the poets dedicated to the love poem were always male. Indeed, the partner I left after many years first courted me with a love poem. He had always been emotionally unavailable and not at all interested in love as either a topic for discussion or a daily life practice, but he was also confident that he had something meaningful to say on the subject. I, on the other hand, thought all my grown-up attempts to write love poems were mushy and pathetic. Words failed me when I tried to write about love. My thoughts seemed sentimental, silly, and superficial. When writing poetry in my girlhood, I had felt the same confidence I would come to see in my adult life only in male writers. When I first began to write poetry in girlhood, I thought love was the only topic, the most important passion. Indeed, the first poem I published at age 12 was called A Look at Love. Somewhere along the way, in that passage from girlhood to womanhood, I learned females really had nothing serious to teach the world about love. Death became my chosen topic. No one around me, professors and students alike, doubted a woman's ability to be serious when it came to thinking and writing about death. All the poems in my first book were on the topic of death and dying. Even so, the poem that opened the book, The Woman's Mourning Song, was about the loss of a loved one and the refusal to let death destroy memory. Contemplating death has always been a subject that leads me back to love. Significantly, I began to think more about the meaning of love as I witnessed the deaths of many friends, comrades, and acquaintances, many of them dying young and unexpectedly. When I was approaching the age of 40 and facing the type of cancer scares that have become so commonplace in women's lives they are practically routine, my first thought as I waited for test results was that I was not ready to die because I had not yet found the love my heart had been seeking. Shortly after this crisis ended, I had a grave illness that was life-threatening. Confronting the possibility of dying, I became obsessed with the meaning of love in my life and in contemporary culture. My work as a cultural critic offered me a constant opportunity to pay close attention to everything the mass media, particularly movies and magazines, tell us about love. Mostly they tell us that everyone wants love, but that we remain totally confused about the practice of love in everyday life. In popular culture, love is always the stuff of fantasy. Maybe this is why men have done most of the theorizing about love. Fantasy has primarily been their domain, both in the sphere of cultural production and in everyday life. Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality, whereas female fantasy is regarded as pure escape. Hence, the romance novel remains the only domain in which women speak of love with any degree of authority. However, when men appropriate the romance genre, their work is far more rewarded than is the writing of women. A book like The Bridges of Madison County is the supreme example. Had a woman pen this sentimental, shallow story of love, which did though have its moments, it is unlikely it would ever have become such a major mainstream success, crossing all boundaries of genre. Of course, consumers of books about love are primarily female, yet male sexism alone does not explain the lack of more books by and about love written by women. Apparently, women are both willing and eager to hear what men have to say about love. Female sexist thinking may lead a woman to feel she already knows what another woman will say. Such a reader may feel that she has more to gain by reading what men have to say. Earlier in my life, I read books about love and never thought about the gender of the writer. Eager to understand what we mean when we speak of love, I did not really consider the extent to which gender shaped a writer's perspective. It was only when I began to think seriously about the subject of love and to write about it that I pondered whether women do this differently from men. Reviewing the literature on love, I noticed how few writers, male or female, talk about the impact of patriarchy, the way in which male domination of women and children stands in the way of love. John Bradshaw's Creating Love, The Next Great Stage of Growth, is one of my favorite books on the topic. He valiantly attempts to establish the link between male domination, the institutionalization of patriarchy, and the lack of love of families. Famous for work that calls attention to the, quote, inner child, Bradshaw believes that ending patriarchy is one step in the direction of love. However, his work on love has never received ongoing attention and celebration. It did not get the notice given work by men who write about love while affirming sexist-defined gender roles. Profound changes in the way we think and act must take place if we are to create a loving culture. Hi, Subadi. What's up? We're on the introduction. Profound changes in the way we think and act must take place if we are to create a loving culture. Men writing about love always testify that they have received love. They speak from this position. It gives what they say authority. Women, more often than not, speak from a position of lack, of not having received the love we long for. A woman who talks of love is still suspect. Perhaps this is because all that enlightened woman may have to say about love will stand as a direct threat and challenge to the visions men have offered us. I enjoy what male writers have to say about love. I cherish my Rumi and my Rilke. I don't know how to say Rilke, but I love Rumi. Male poets who stir hearts with their words. Men often write about love through fantasy, through what they imagine is possible rather than what they concretely know. We know that Rilke did not write as he lived, that so many words of love offered us by great men fail us when we come face to face with reality. And even though John Gray's work troubles me and makes me mad, I confess to reading and rereading, Men are from Mars, Women are from Venus. But like many women and men, I want to know about the meaning of love beyond the realm of fantasy, beyond what we imagine can happen. I want to know love's truths as we live them. Almost all the recent popular self-help writing by men on love, from works like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus to John Wellwood's Love and Awakening, make use of feminist perspective on gender roles. Ultimately, though, the authors remain wedded to belief systems which suggest that there are basic inherent differences between men and women. In actuality, all the concrete proof indicates that while the perspectives of men and women often differ, these differences are learned characteristics, not innate or natural traits. If the notion that men and women were absolute opposites inhabiting totally different emotional universes were true, men would never have become the supreme authorities on love. Given gender stereotypes that assign to women the role of feelings and being emotional, and to men the role of reason and non-emotion, quote, real men would shy away from any talk of love. Though considered the established, quote, authorities on the subject, only a few men talk freely, telling the world what they think about love. In everyday life, males and females alike are relatively silent about love. Our silence shields us from uncertainty. We want to know love. We are simply afraid the desire to know too much about love will lead us closer and closer to the abyss of lovelessness. While ours is a nation wherein the vast majority of citizens are followers of religious faiths that proclaim the transformative power of love, many people feel that they do not have a clue as to how to love. And practically everyone suffers a crisis of faith when it comes to realizing biblical theories about the art of loving in everyday life. It is far easier to talk about loss than it is to talk about love. It is easier to articulate the pain of love's absence than to describe its presence and meaning in our lives. Taught to believe that the mind, not the heart, is the seat of learning, many of us believe that to speak of love with any emotional intensity means we will be perceived as weak and irrational. And it is especially hard to speak of love when what we have to say calls attention to the fact that lovelessness is more common than love, that many of us are not sure what we mean when we talk of love or how to express love. Everyone wants to know more about love. We want to know what it means to love, what we can do in our everyday lives to love and be loved. We want to know how to seduce those among us who remain wedded to lovelessness and open the door to their hearts to let love enter. The strength of our desire does not change the power of our cultural uncertainty. Everywhere we learn that love is important, and yet we are bombarded by its failure. In the realm of the political, among the religious, in our families, and in our romantic lives, we see little indication that love informs decisions, strengthens our understanding of community, or keeps us together. This bleak picture in no way alters the nature of our longing. We still hope that love will prevail. We still believe in love's promise. Just as the graffiti proclaimed, our hope lies in the reality that so many of us continue to believe in love's power. We believe it is important to know love. We believe it is important to search for love's truths. In an overwhelming number of private conversations and public dialogues, I have given and heard testimony about the mounting lovelessness in our culture and the fear it strikes in everyone's heart. This despair about love is coupled with a callous cynicism that frowns upon any suggestion that love is as important as work, as crucial to our survival as a nation as the drive to succeed. Awesomely, our nation, like no other in the world, is a culture driven by the quest to love. It's the theme of our movies, music, literature, even as it offers so little opportunity for us to understand love's meaning or to know how to realize love in word and deed. Our nation is equally driven by sexual obsession. There is no aspect of sexuality that is not studied, talked about, or demonstrated. How-to classes exist for every dimension of sexuality, even masturbation. Yet schools for love do not exist. Everyone assumes that we will know how to love instinctively. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we still accept that the family is the primary school for love. Did I laugh? Those of us who do not learn how to love among family are expected to experience love in romantic relationships. However, this love often eludes us, and we spend a lifetime undoing the damage caused by cruelty, neglect, and all manner of lovelessness experienced in our families of origin and in relationships where we simply did not know what to do. Only love can heal the wounds of the past. However, the intensity of our woundedness often leads to a closing of the heart, making it impossible for us to give or receive the love that is given to us. To open our hearts more fully to love's power and grace, we must dare to acknowledge how little we know of love in both theory and practice. We must face the confusion and disappointment that much of what we were taught about the nature of love makes no sense when applied to daily life. Contemplating the practice of love in everyday life, thinking about how we love and what is needed for ours to become a culture where love's sacred presence can be felt everywhere, I wrote this meditation. As the title, All About Love, New Visions, indicates, we want to live in a culture where love can flourish. We yearn to end the lovelessness that is so pervasive in our society. This book tells us how to return to love. All About Love, New Visions provides radical new ways to think about the art of loving, offering a hopeful, joyous vision of love's transformative power. It lets us know what we must do to love again. Gathering love's wisdom, it lets us know what we must do to be touched by love's grace. Okay, all right, Bell. How we doing, chat? Is volume nice? Is anything weird? I do have a library with a ladder. It's real. I'm settling in. The snow's falling outside. Chapter 1. Clarity. Give love words. This is a quote from Diane Ackerman, who said, "As a society, we are embarrassed by love. We treat it as if it were an obscenity. We reluctantly admit to it. Even saying the word makes us stumble and blush. Love is the most important thing in our lives, a passion for which we would fight or die, and yet we're reluctant to linger over its names. Without a supple vocabulary, we can't even talk or think about it directly." The men in my life have always been the folks who are wary of using the word love lightly. They are wary because they believe women make too much of love. And they know that what we think love means is not always what they believe it means. Our confusion about what we mean when we use the word love is the source of our difficulty in loving. If our society had a commonly held understanding of the meaning of love, the act of loving would not be so mystifying. Dictionary definitions of love tend to emphasize romantic love, defining love first and foremost as, quote, profoundly tender, passionate affection for another person, especially when based on sexual attraction, unquote. Of course, other definitions let the reader know one may have such feelings within a context that is not sexual. However, deep affection does not really adequately describe love's meaning. The vast majority of books on the subject of love work hard to avoid giving clear definitions. In the introduction to Diane Ackerman's A Natural History of Love, she declares, quote, love is the great intangible, unquote. A few sentences down from this, she suggests, quote, everyone admits that love is wonderful and necessary, yet no one can agree on what it is. Coyly, she adds, we use the word love in such a sloppy way that it can mean almost nothing or absolutely everything. No definition ever appears in her book that would help anyone trying to learn the art of loving. Yet she is not alone in writing of love in ways that cloud our understanding. When the very meaning of the word is cloaked in mystery, it should not come as a surprise that most people find it hard to define what they mean when they use the word love. Imagine how much easier it would be for us to learn how to love if we began with a shared definition. The word love is most often defined as a noun, yet all the more astute theorists of love acknowledge that we would all love better if we used it as a verb. I spent years searching for a meaningful definition of the word love and was deeply relieved when I found one in psychiatrist M. Scott Peck's classic self-help book, The Road Less Traveled, first published in 1978. Echoing the work of Erich Fromm, he defines love as, quote, the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Explaining further, he continues, love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely, both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. Since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition encounters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually. I might have to read that bit again. That wasn't sinking in. He defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. All right. Explaining further, he continues, love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely, both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. Since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition counters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually. All right. Everyone who has witnessed the growth process of a child from the moment of birth on sees clearly that before language is known, before the identity of caretakers is recognized, babies respond to affectionate care. Usually they respond with sounds or looks of pleasure. As they grow older, they respond to affectionate care by giving affection, cooing at the sight of a welcomed caretaker. Affection is only one ingredient of love. To truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Learning faulty definitions of love when we are quite young makes it difficult to be loving as we grow older. We start out committed to the right path but go in the wrong direction. Most of us learn early on to think of love as a feeling. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we cathect with them. That is, we invest feelings or emotion in them. That process of investment wherein a loved one becomes important to us is called cathexis. Did not know that. In his book, Peck rightly emphasizes that most of us confuse cathecting with loving. We all know how often individuals feel connected to someone through the process of cathecting. We all know how often individuals feeling connected to someone through the process of cathecting insist that they love the other person, even if they are hurting or neglecting them. Since their feeling is that of cathexis, they insist that what they feel is love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Abuse and neglect are, by definition, the opposites of nurturance and care. Often we hear of a man who beats his children and wife and then goes to the corner bar and passionately proclaims how much he loves them. If you talk to the wife on a good day, she may also insist he loves her, despite his violence. An overwhelming majority of us come from dysfunctional families in which we were taught we were not okay, where we were shamed, verbally and or physically abused, and emotionally neglected, even as we were also taught to believe that we were loved. For most folks, it is just too threatening to embrace a definition of love that would no longer enable us to see love as present in our families. Too many of us need to cling to a notion of love that either makes abuse acceptable or at least makes it seem that whatever happened was not that bad. Raised in a family in which aggressive shaming and verbal humiliation coexisted with lots of affection and care, I had difficulty embracing the term dysfunctional. Since I felt and still feel attached to my parents and siblings, proud of all the positive dimensions of our family life, I did not want to describe us by using a term that implied our life together had been all negative or bad. I did not want my parents to think I was disparaging them. I was appreciative of all the good things that they had given in the family. With therapeutic help, I was able to see the term dysfunctional as a useful description and not as an absolute negative judgment. My family of origin provided, throughout my childhood, a dysfunctional setting, and it remains one. This does not mean that it is not also a setting in which affection, delight, and care are present. On any day in my family of origin, I might have been given caring attention, wherein my being a smart girl was affirmed and encouraged. Then, hours later, I would be told that it was precisely because I thought I was so smart that I was likely to go crazy and be put in a mental institution where no one would visit me. Not surprisingly, this odd mixture of care and unkindness did not positively nurture the growth of my spirit. Applying Peck's definition of love to my childhood experience in my household of origin, I could not honestly describe it as loving. Pressed in therapy to describe my household of origin in terms of whether it was loving or not, I painfully admitted that I did not feel loved in our household, but that I did feel cared for. And outside my household of origin, I felt genuinely loved by individual family members like my grandfather. This experience of genuine love, a combination of care, commitment, trust, knowledge, responsibility, and respect, nurtured my wounded spirit and enabled me to survive acts of lovelessness. I am grateful to have been raised in a family that was caring and strongly believe that had my parents been loved well by their parents, they would have given that love to their children. They gave what they had been given, care. Remember, care is a dimension of love, but simply giving care does not mean we are loving. Like many adults who were verbally and or physically abused as children, I spent a lot of my life trying to deny the bad things that had happened, trying to cling only to the memory of good and delicious moments in which I had known care. In my case, the more successful I became, the more I wanted to cease speaking the truth about my childhood. Often, critics of self-help literature and recovery programs like to make it seem that far too many of us are eager to embrace the belief that our families of origins were, are, or remain dysfunctional and lacking in love. But I have found that, like myself, most people, whether raised in an excessively violent or abusive home or not, shy away from embracing any negative critique of our experiences. Usually it requires some therapeutic intervention, whether through literature that teaches and enlightens us or therapy, before many of us can even begin to critically examine childhood experiences and acknowledge the ways in which they have had an impact on our adult behavior. Most of us find it difficult to accept the definition of love that says we are never loved in a context where there is abuse. Most psychologically and or physically abused children have been taught by parenting adults that love can coexist with abuse. And in extreme cases, that abuse is an expression of love. This faulty thinking often shapes our adult perceptions of love, so that just as we would cling to the notion that those who hurt us as children loved us, we try to rationalize being hurt by other adults by insisting that they love us. In my case, many of the negative, shaming practices I was subjected to in childhood continued in my romantic adult relationships. Initially, I did not want to accept a definition of love that would also compel me to face the possibility that I had not known love in the relationships that were most primary to me. Years of therapy and critical reflection enabled me to accept that there is no stigma attached to acknowledging a lack of love in one's primary relationships. And if one's goal is self-recovery, to be well in one's soul, honestly and realistically confronting lovelessness is part of the healing process. A lack of sustained love does not mean the absence of care, affection, or pleasure. In fact, my long-term romantic relationships, like the bonds in my family, have been so full of care that it would be quite easy to overlook the ongoing emotional dysfunction. Vampire Hunter D. Yeah, we talking about love today. In order to change the lovelessness in my primary relationships, I had to first learn anew the meaning of love, and from there, learn how to be loving. Embracing a definition of love that was clear was the first step in the process. Like many who read The Road Less Traveled again and again, I think this is the book, not the Robert Frost poem, I am grateful to have been given a definition of love that helped me face the places in my life where love was lacking. I was in my mid-20s when I first learned to understand love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. It still took years for me to let go of learned patterns of behavior that negated my capacity to give and receive love. One pattern that made the practice of love especially difficult was my constantly choosing to be with men who were emotionally wounded, who were not that interested in being loved even though they desired in being loving even though they desired to be loved. I wanted to know love, but I was afraid to surrender and trust another person. I was afraid to be intimate. By choosing men who were not interested in being loving, I was able to practice giving love, but always within an unfulfilling context. Naturally, my need to receive love was not met. I got what I was accustomed to getting, care and affection, usually mingled with a degree of unkindness, neglect, and on some occasions outright cruelty. At times, I was unkind. It took me a long time to recognize that while I wanted to know love, I was afraid to be truly intimate. Many of us choose relationships of affection and care that will never become loving because they feel safer. The demands are not as intense as loving requires. The risk is not as great. We lost somebody? Thank you, Sparkle Muffin. I only saw their first message when they seemed so down. And they had a name that almost related to one of my songs, which further confused me. Anyhow, all right. So many of us, they weren't reading the room. Oh, I got it. Hey, Blaketown, what's happening? So many of us long for love, but lack the courage to take risks. Even though we are obsessed with the idea of love, the truth is that most of us live relatively decent, somewhat satisfying lives, even if we often feel that love is lacking. In these relationships, we share genuine affection and or care. For most of us, that feels like enough because it is usually a lot more than we received in our families of origin. Undoubtedly, many of us are more comfortable with the notion that love can mean anything to anybody precisely because when we define it with precision and clarity, it brings us face to face with our lacks, with terrible alienation. The truth is, far too many people in our culture do not know what love is. And this not knowing feels like a terrible secret, a lack that we have to cover up. Had I been given a clear definition of love earlier in my life, it would not have taken me so long to become a more loving person. Had I shared with others a common understanding of what it means to love, it would have been easier to create love. It is particularly distressing that so many recent books on love continue to insist that definitions of love are unnecessary and meaningless. Or worse, the author suggests love should mean something different to men than it does to women, that the sexes should respect and adapt to our inability to communicate, since we do not share the same language. This type of literature is popular because it does not demand a change in fixed ways of thinking about gender roles, culture, or love. Rather than sharing strategies that would help us become more loving, it actually encourages everyone to adapt to circumstances where love is lacking. Women, more so than men, rush out to purchase this literature. We do so because collectively we are concerned about lovelessness. Since many women believe they will never know fulfilling love, they are willing to settle for strategies that help ease the pain and increase the peace, pleasure, and playfulness in existing relationships, particularly romantic ones. No vehicle in our culture exists for readers to talk back to the writers of this literature, and we do not really know if it has been truly useful, if it promotes constructive change. The fact that women more than men buy self-help books using our consumer dollars to keep specific books on bestseller lists is no indication that these books actually help us transform our lives. I have bought tons of self-help books. Only a very few have really made a difference in my life. This is true for many readers. The lack of an ongoing public discussion and public policy about the practice of love in our culture and in our lives means that we will still look to books as a primary source of guidance and direction. Large numbers of readers embrace Peck's definition of love and are applying it to their lives in ways that are helpful and transformative. We can spread the word by evoking this definition in day-to-day conversations, not just when we talk to other adults, but in our conversations with children and teenagers. When we intervene on mystifying assumptions that love cannot be defined by offering workable, useful definitions, we are already creating a context where love can begin to flourish. Some folks have difficulty with Peck's definition of love because he uses the word spiritual. I was kind of feeling this. I was almost going to raise this. He is referring to that dimension of our core reality where mind, body, and spirit are one. An individual does not need to be a believer in a religion to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force, some of us call it soul, that when nurtured enhances our capacity to be more fully self-actualized and able to engage in communion with the world around us. I'll take it. You may not. I don't know. I don't know how you feel, but I'm glad it was addressed. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught we have no control over our, quote, feelings. Yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. To think of actions shaping feelings is one way we rid ourselves of conventionally accepted assumptions, such as... Sorry, something weird happened. I thought I just heard a loud noise come from my headphones. Did we get a follower or something? I don't know. I don't know what the fuck happened. Let me go back. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. To think of actions shaping feelings is one way we rid ourselves of conventionally accepted assumptions, such as that parents love their children, or that one simply, quote, falls in love without exercising will or choice. That there are such things as, quote, crimes of passion, i.e., he killed her because he loved her so much. If we were constantly remembering that love is as love does, we would not use the word in a manner that devalues and degrades its meaning. When we are loving, we openly and honestly express care, affection, responsibility, respect, commitment, and trust. Definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. As we move toward our desired destination, we chart the journey, creating a map. We need a map to guide us on our journey to love, starting with the place where we know what we mean when we speak of love. Yeah, that's chapter 1. I thought I had turned alerts off, but maybe not. Let me take a look, and maybe we'll see what happened. And maybe I'll take a drink of water. How are we feeling? We rocking with this definition of love by the great bell hooks? Oh, it's this guy. It's this guy. All right. As I'm reading this, I'm like, have I ever read a book about love? I definitely felt, I was like, bell hooks has a lot of great writing, and I didn't know where to begin. It's the holiday season, and so it felt like a good time to talk about love, bonds, and such, as people are. This is the time you start like feeling all the feels, right? But I was like, oh man, are we going to have people's interest if we talk about love? I was trepidatious talking about love on Twitch. But so far so good. I'm liking this. Chapter 2, Justice. Childhood love lessons. Severe separations in early life leave emotional scars on the brain because they assault the essential human connection, the parent-child bond which teaches us that we are lovable. the parent-child bond which teaches us how to love. We cannot be whole human beings. Indeed, we may find it hard to be human without the sustenance of this first attachment. That's a quote from Judith Viorst. We learn about love in childhood. Whether our homes are happy or troubled, our families functional or dysfunctional, it's the original school of love. I cannot remember ever wanting to ask my parents to define love. To my child's mind, love was the good feeling you got when family treated you like you mattered and you treated them like they mattered. Love was always and only about good feeling. In early adolescence, when we were whipped and told that these punishments were, quote, for our own good, or, quote, I'm doing this because I love you, my siblings and I were confused. Why was harsh punishment a gesture of love? As children do, we pretended to accept this grown-up logic, but we knew in our hearts it was not right. We knew it was a lie. Just like the lie the grown-ups told when they explained after harsh punishment, quote, it hurts me more than it hurts you. There is nothing that creates more confusion about love in the minds and hearts of children than unkind and or cruel punishment, meted out by the grown-ups they have been taught they should love and respect. Such children learn early on to question the meaning of love, to yearn for love even as they doubt it exists. On the flip side, there are masses of children who grow up confident love is a good feeling, who are never punished, who are allowed to believe that love is only about getting your needs met and your desires satisfied. In their child's minds, love is not about what they have to give. Love is mostly something given to them. When children like these are overindulged, either materially or by being allowed to act out, this is a form of neglect. These children, though not in any way abused or uncared for, are usually as unclear about love's meaning as their neglected and emotionally abandoned counterparts. Both groups have learned to think about love primarily in relation to good feelings, in the context of reward and punishment. From early childhood on, most of us remember being told we were loved when we did things pleasing to our parents, and we learned to give them affirmations of love when they pleased us. As children grow, they associate love more with acts of attention, affection, and caring. They still see parents who attempt to satisfy their desires as giving love. Children from all classes tell me that they love their parents and are loved by them, even those who are being hurt or abused. When asked to define love, small children pretty much agree that it's a good feeling. Quote, like when you have something to eat that you really like, quote, especially if it's your favorite, they will say. My mommy loves me because she takes care of me and helps me do everything right. When asked how to love someone, they talk about giving hugs and kisses, being sweet and cuddly. The notion that love is about getting what one wants, whether it's a hug or a new sweater or a trip to Disneyland, is a way of thinking about love that makes it difficult for children to acquire a deeper emotional understanding. We like to imagine that most children will be born into homes where they will be loved, but love will not be present if the grown-ups who parent do not know how to love. Although lots of children are raised in homes where they are given some degree of care, love may not be sustained or even present. Adults across lines of class, race, and gender indict the family. Their testimony conveys worlds of childhood where love was lacking, where chaos, neglect, abuse, and coercion reigned supreme. In her recent book, Raised in Captivity, Why Does America Fail Its Children?, Lucia Hodgson documents the reality of lovelessness in the lives of a huge majority of children in the United States. Every day, thousands of children in our culture are verbally and physically abused, starved, tortured, and murdered. They are the true victims of intimate terrorism in that they have no collective voice and no rights. They remain the property of parenting adults to do with as they will. There can be no love without justice. Until we live in a culture that not only respects but also upholds basic civil rights for children, most children will not know love. In our culture, the private family dwelling is the one institutionalized sphere of power that can easily be autocratic and fascistic. As absolute rulers, parents can usually decide without any intervention what is best for their children. If children's rights are taken away in any domestic household, they have no legal recourse. Unlike women who can organize to protest sexist domination demanding both equal rights and justice, children can only rely on well-meaning adults to assist them if they are being exploited and oppressed in the home. We all know that, irrespective of class or race, other adults rarely intervene to question or challenge what their peers are doing with, quote, their children. At a fun party, mostly of educated, well-paid professionals, a multiracial, multi-generational evening, the subject of disciplining kids by hitting was raised. Almost all the guests over 30 spoke about the necessity of using physical punishment. Many of us in the room had been smacked, whipped, or beaten as children. Men spoke the loudest in defense of physical punishment. Women, mostly mothers, talked about hitting as a last resort, but one that they deployed when necessary. As one man bragged about the aggressive beatings he had received from his mother, sharing that, quote, they had been good for him, I interrupted and suggested that he might not be the misogynist woman-hater he is today if he had not been brutally beaten by a woman as a child. Although it is too simplistic to assume that Bell Hooks sounds like she was great at parties. Although it is too simplistic to assume that just because we are hit as kids, we will grow up to be people who hit, I wanted the group to acknowledge that being physically hurt or abused by grown-ups when we are children has harmful consequences in our adult life. A young professional, the mother of a small boy, bragged about the fact that she did not hit, that when her son misbehaved, she clamped down on his flesh, pinching him until he got the message. But this, too, is a form of coercive abuse. The other guests supported this young mother and her husband in their methods. I was astounded. I was a lone voice speaking out for the rights of children. Later, with other people, I suggested that had we all been listening to a man tell us that every time his wife or girlfriend does something he does not like, he just clamps down on her flesh, pinching her as hard as he can, everyone would have been appalled. They would have seen the action as both coercive and abusive. Yet they could not acknowledge that it was wrong for an adult to hurt a child in this way. All the parents in that room claim that they are loving. All the people in that room were college educated. Most call themselves good liberals, supportive of civil rights and feminism. But when it came to the rights of children, they had a different standard. One of the most important social myths we must debunk if we are to become a more loving culture is the one that teaches parents that abuse and neglect can coexist with love. Abuse and neglect negate love. Care and affirmation, the opposite of abuse and humiliation, are the foundation of love. No one can rightfully claim to be loving when behaving abusively. Yet parents do this all the time in our culture. Children are told that they are loved even though they are being abused. I wonder if we should throw up a content warning at this point, because we are getting into some subject matter. Let me just throw one in the chat real quick. That didn't feel like a great one. Bell Hooks kind of goes all over the place. If anyone can come with a better one, I'll pin this for now, or Sparkles pinned it. Because we're kind of going everywhere. We're hitting a lot of topics as we go. The topics of abuse, I keep it broad. Hold up. All right. Familial trauma. Yeah, topics of abuse, familial trauma. Maybe. It is a testimony to the failure of loving practice that abuse is happening in the first place. Many of the men who offer their personal testimony in Boyhood Growing Up My Ill tell stories of random violent abuse by parents that inflicted trauma. In his essay, When My Father Hit Me, Bob Shelby describes the pain of repeated beatings by his dad, stating, "From these experiences with my father, I learned about the abuse of power. By physically hitting my mother and me, he effectively stopped us from reacting to his humiliation of us. we cease to protest his violations of our boundaries and his ignoring our sense of being individuals with needs, demands, and rights of our own. Throughout his essay, Shelby expresses contradictory understandings about the meaning of love. On the one hand, he says, quote, "I have no doubt that my father loved me, but his love became misdirected. He said he wanted to give me what he didn't have as a child." Quote. On the other hand, Shelby confesses, quote, "What he most showed me, however, was his difficulty in being loved. All his life he had struggled with feelings of being unloved." Quote. When Shelby describes his childhood, it is clear that his dad had affection for him and also gave him care some of the time. However, his dad did not know how to give and receive love. The affection he gave was undermined by the abuse. Writing from the space of adult recollection, Shelby talks about the impact of physical abuse on his boyhood psyche. Quote, "As the intensity of the pain of his hits increased, I felt the hurt in my heart. I realized what hurt me the most were my feelings of love for this man who was hitting me. I covered my love with a dark cloth of hate." A similar story is told by other men in autobiographical narrative, men of all classes and races. One of the myths about lovelessness is that it exists only among the poor and deprived. Yet lovelessness is not a function of poverty or material lack. In homes where material privileges abound, children suffer emotional neglect and abuse. In order to cope with the pain of wounds inflicted in childhood, most of the men in boyhood sought some form of therapeutic care. To find their way back to love, they had to heal. Many men in our culture never recover from childhood unkindness. Studies show that males and females who are violently humiliated and abused repeatedly, with no caring intervention, are likely to be dysfunctional and will be predisposed to abuse others violently. In Jarvis J. Masters' book, Finding Freedom, Writings from Death Row, a chapter called Scars recounts his recognition that a vast majority of the scars covering the bodies of fellow inmates, not all of whom were on death row, were not, as one might think, the result of violent adult interactions. These men were covered with scars from childhood beatings inflicted by parenting adults. Yet he reports none of them saw themselves as the victims of abuse. Quote, "Throughout my many years of institutionalization, I, like so many of these men, unconsciously took refuge behind prison walls. Not until I read a series of books for adults who had been abused as children did I become committed to the process of examining my own childhood." Organizing the men for group discussion, Masters writes, "I spoke to them of the pain I had carried throughout more than a dozen institutions, and I explained how all these events ultimately trapped me in a pattern of lashing out against everything. Like many abused children, male and female, these men were beaten by mothers, fathers, and other parental caregivers. When Masters' mother dies, he feels grief that he cannot be with her. The other inmates did not understand this longing since she neglected and abused him. He responds, quote, "She had neglected me, but am I to neglect myself as well by denying that I wished I'd been with her when she died, that I still love her?" Quote. Even on death row, Masters' heart remained open, and he can honestly confess the longing to give and receive love. Being hurt by parenting adults rarely alters a child's desire to love and be loved by them. Among grown-ups who were wounded in childhood, the desire to be loved by uncaring parents persists, even when there is a clear acceptance of the reality that this love will never be forthcoming. Often, children will want to remain with parental caregivers who have hurt them because of their cathected feelings for those adults. They will cling to the misguided assumption that their parents love them even in the face of remembered abuse, usually by denying the abuse and focusing on random acts of care. In the prologue to Creating Love, John Bradshaw calls this confusion about love mystification. He shares, "I was brought up to believe that love is rooted in blood relationships. You naturally loved anyone in your family. Love was not a choice. The love I learned about was bound by duty and obligation. My family taught me our culture's rules and beliefs about love. Even with the best intentions, our parents often confused love with what we would now call abuse. To demystify the meanings of love, the art and practice of loving, we need to use sound definitions of love when talking with children, and we also need to ensure that loving action is never tainted with abuse. In a society like ours, where children are denied full civil rights, it is absolutely crucial that parenting adults learn how to offer loving discipline. Setting boundaries and teaching children how to set boundaries for themselves prior to misbehavior is an essential part of loving parenting. When parents start out disciplining children by using punishment, this becomes the pattern children respond to. Loving parents work hard to discipline without punishment. This does not mean that they never punish, only that when they do punish, they choose punishments like timeouts for the taking away of privileges. They focus on teaching children how to be self-disciplining and how to take responsibility for their actions. Since the vast majority of us were raised in households where punishment was deemed the primary, if not the only way to teach discipline, the fact that discipline can be taught without punishment surprises many people. One of the simplest ways children learn discipline is by learning how to be orderly in daily life, to clean up any messes they make. Just teaching a child to take responsibility for placing toys in the appropriate place after playtime is one way to teach responsibility and self-discipline. Learning to clean up the mess made during playtime helps a child learn to be responsible, and they can learn from this practical act how to cope with emotional mess. Make the kids clean up the shit. Teach them how to put away the toys. Duty and obligation to family is a motherfucker. You're talking to an Italian American. I know it. Were there current television shows that actually modeled loving parenting? Parents could learn these skills. Television shows oriented toward families often favorably represent children when they are overindulged, are disrespectful, or are acting out. Fuck yeah. The blood of the covenant. That's a fucking badass saying, Sparkle Muffin. Hold on. Pause for throat clear. Pause for hydration. Pause for second throat clear. This is a good point. I noticed this in TV shows. Television shows oriented toward families often favorably represent children when they are overindulged, are disrespectful, or are acting out. Often they behave in a more adult manner than the parents. What we see on television today actually, at best, models for us inappropriate behavior and, in worst-case scenarios, unloving behaviors. A great example of this is a movie like Home Alone, which celebrates disobedience and violence. But television can portray caring, loving family interaction. There are whole generations of adults who talk nostalgically about how they wanted their families to be like the fictive portraits of family life portrayed on Leave It to Beaver or My Three Sons. We desired our families to be like those we saw on the screen because we were witnessing loving parenting, loving households, expressing to parents our desire to have families like the ones we saw on the screens. We were often told that the families were not realistic. The reality was, however, that parents who come from unloving homes have never learned how to love and cannot create loving home environments or see them as realistic when watching them on television. The reality they are most familiar with and trust is the one they knew intimately. There was nothing utopian about the way problems were resolved on these shows. Parent and child discussion, critical reflection, and finding a way to make amends was usually the process by which misbehavior was addressed. On both shows, there was never just one parenting figure. Even though the mother was absent on My Three Sons, the lovable Uncle Charlie was a second parent. In a loving household where there are several parental caregivers, when a child feels one parent is being unjust, that child can appeal to another adult for mediation, understanding, or support. We live in a society where there are a growing number of single parents, female and male, but the individual parent can always choose a friend to be another parenting figure, however limited their interaction. This is why the categories of godmother and godfather are so crucial. When my best girlhood friend chose to have a child without a father in the household, I became the godmother, a second parenting figure. My friend's daughter turns to me to intervene if there is a misunderstanding or miscommunication between her and her mom. I've been this guy many, many times. Here's one small example. My adult friend had never received an allowance as a child and did not feel she had the available extra money to offer an allowance to her daughter. She also believed her daughter would use all the money to buy sweets. Telling me that her daughter was angry with her over this issue, she opened up the space for us to have a dialogue. I shared my belief that allowances are important ways to teach children discipline, boundaries, and working through desire versus needs. I knew enough about my friend's finances to challenge her insistence that she could not afford to pay a small allowance, while simultaneously encouraging her not to project the wrongs of her childhood onto the present. As to whether the daughter would buy candy, I suggested she give the allowance with a statement of hope that it would not be used for overindulgence and see what happened. It all worked out just fine. Happy to have an allowance, the daughter chose to save her money to buy things she thought were really important, and candy was not on this list. Had there been another adult parenting figure involved, it might have taken these two a longer time to resolve their conflict, and unnecessary estrangement and wounding might have occurred. Significantly, love and respectful interaction between two adults exemplified for the daughter, who was told about the discussion, ways of problem solving. By revealing her willingness to accept criticism and her capacity to reflect on her behavior and change, the mother modeled for her daughter, without losing dignity or authority, the recognition that parents are not always right. God damn it. God damn it, bell hooks. Be my aunt, please. Make me a better uncle. Speak to the other adults I am fucking dealing with out here. It's hard to be the catcher in the rye, but I love this. I love this dialogue with me. I'm a single parent. Please, let's problem solve. Until we begin to see loving parenting in all walks of life in our culture, many people will continue to believe we can only teach discipline through punishment, and that harsh punishment is an acceptable way to relate to children. Because children can innately offer affection or respond to affectionate care by returning it, it is often assumed that they know how to love and therefore do not need to learn the art of loving. While the will to love is present in very young children, they still need guidance in the ways of love. Grown-ups provide that guidance. Love is as love does, and it is our responsibility to give children love. When we love children, we acknowledge by our every action that they are not property, that they have rights, that we respect and uphold their rights. Without justice, there can be no love. Damn, Belle. You had the Brady Bunch? Yeah, that's funny, man. I remember the Brady Bunch. And yeah, I guess they were, cuz I'm a little young for Leave It to Beaver and that other one, My Three Sons. I didn't see those. But the Brady Bunch was on, and I guess they probably were the most functional family on TV. But it is funny how like somewhere in the 90s TV just shifted and all the families on TV just became very sarcastic and nasty, and or the kids became really disrespectful. Eat My Shorts. I remember my family was very into Married with Children. I don't know if that show made it over there, but Al Bundy, the famous Al Bundy. It did? Yeah. And they were such dickheads to each other. I remember thinking that as kids, too. I remember thinking, like, these people are all assholes to each other. Have you ever seen, there's a supercut online somewhere of, and The Cosby Show. That's right, The Cosby Show. That was probably the most functional family. Although Bill Cosby was definitely a very patriarchal father figure. I don't remember. I guess he didn't hit the kids. He at least like negotiated with the kids. I don't know. Too much to be said about the Cosby Show. Yeah. But I'm just talking only about like how the family interacted with each other. They were like as a TV family, as a fictional TV family, I must stress. I guess they modeled, I mean, they weren't beating the shit out of their kids, at least. But yeah, at a certain point, the tide did turn. But I was going to say, have you ever seen the show Everybody Loves Raymond? Somebody managed to edit out all of the audience laugh track out of a bunch of those episodes, and it's on YouTube somewhere, and it's just the meanest darkest dialogue. Once the laugh track is gone, it's just people saying horrible things to each other. Chapter 3. Honesty. Be true to love. John Wellwood said, "When we reveal ourselves to our partner and find that this brings healing rather than harm, we make an important discovery, that intimate relationship can provide a sanctuary from the world of facades, a sacred space where we can be ourselves as we are. This kind of unmasking, speaking our truth, sharing our inner struggles, and revealing our raw edges is sacred activity which allows two souls to meet and touch more deeply." 2.5 children. What a name. It is no accident that when we first learn about justice and fair play as children, it is usually in a context where the issue is one of telling the truth. The heart of justice is truth-telling, seeing ourselves and the world the way it is rather than the way we want it to be. In recent years, sociologists and psychologists have documented the fact that we live in a nation where people are lying more and more each day. Philosopher Cicely Bach's book, Lying, Moral Choice in Public and Private Life, was among the first works to call attention to the grave extent to which lying has become accepted and commonplace in our daily interactions. M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled includes an entire section on lying. In The Dance of Deception, Harriet Lerner, another widely read psychotherapist, calls attention to the way in which women are encouraged by sexist socialization to pretend and manipulate, to lie as a way to please. Lerner outlines the various ways in which constant pretense and lying alienate women from their true feelings, how it leads to depression and loss of self-awareness. Lies are told about the most insignificant aspects of daily life. When many of us are asked basic questions like, "How are you today?" a lie is substituted for the truth. Much of the lying people do in everyday life is done either to avoid conflict or to spare someone's feelings. Hence, if you are asked to come to dinner with someone whom you do not particularly like, you do not tell the truth or simply decline. You make up a story. You tell a lie. In such a situation, it should be appropriate to simply decline if stating one's reason for declining might unnecessarily hurt someone. In such a situation, it should be appropriate to simply decline if stating one's reasons for declining might unnecessarily hurt someone. Lots of people learn how to lie in childhood. Usually they begin to lie to avoid punishment or to avoid disappointing or hurting an adult. How many of us can vividly recall childhood moments where we courageously practiced the honesty we had been taught to value by our parents, only to find that they did not really mean for us to tell the truth all the time? In far too many cases, children are punished in circumstances where they respond with honesty to a question posed by an adult authority figure. It is impressed on their consciousness early on, then, that telling the truth will cause pain, and so they learn that lying is a way to avoid being hurt and hurting others. Lots of children are confused by the insistence that they simultaneously be honest and yet also learn how to practice convenient duplicity. As they mature, they begin to see how often grown-ups lie. They begin to see that few people around them tell the truth. I was raised in a world where children were taught to tell the truth, but it did not take long for us to figure out that adults did not practice what they preached. Among my siblings, those who learned how to tell polite lies or say what grown-ups wanted to hear were always more popular and more rewarded than those of us who told the truth. Among any group of kids, it is never clear why some quickly learn the fine art of dissimulation. Come on, B. You're a rapper. The fine art of dissimulation. Why some quickly learn the fine art of dissimulation, that is, taking on whatever appearance is needed to manipulate a situation, while others find it hard to mask true feeling. Since pretense is such an expected aspect of childhood play, it is a perfect context for mastering the art of dissimulation. Concealing the truth is often a fun part of childhood play, yet when it becomes a common practice, it is a dangerous prelude to lying all the time. Sometimes children are fascinated by lying because they see the power it gives them over adults. Imagine, a little girl goes to school and tells her teacher she is adopted, knowing all the while that this is not true. She revels in the attention received, both the sympathy and the understanding offered, as well as the frustration and anger of her parents when the teacher calls to talk about this newly discovered information. A friend of mine, who lies a lot, tells me she loves fooling people and making them act on knowledge that only she knows is untrue. She is 10 years old. When I was her age, I was frightened by lies. They confused me and they created confusion. Other kids poked fun at me because I was not good at lying. In the one truly violent episode between my mother and father, he accused her of lying to him. Then there was the night an older sister lied and said she was babysitting when she was actually out on a date. As he hit her, our father kept yelling, "Don't you lie to me." While the violence of his response created in us a terror of the consequences of lying, it did not alter the reality that we knew he did not always tell the truth. His favorite way of lying was withholding. His motto was, "Just remain silent when asked questions, then you will not, quote, get caught in a lie." The men I have loved have always lied to avoid confrontation or take responsibility for inappropriate behavior. In Dorothy Dinnerstein's groundbreaking book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, Sexual Arrangements and Human Malaise, she shares the insight that when a little boy learns that his powerful mother, who controls his life, really has no power within a patriarchy, it confuses him and causes rage. Lying becomes one of the strategic ways he can, quote, act out and render his mother powerless. Lying enables him to manipulate the mother even as he exposes her lack of power. This makes him feel more powerful. Males learn to lie as a way of obtaining power, and females not only do the same, but they also lie to pretend powerlessness. In her work, Harriet Lerner talks about the way in which patriarchy upholds deception, encouraging women to present a false self to men and vice versa. In Dory Hollander's 101 Lies Men Tell Women, she confirms that while both men and women lie, her data and the findings of other researchers indicate that, quote, men tend to lie more and with more devastating consequences. For many young males, the earliest experience of power over others comes from the thrill of lying to more powerful adults and getting away with it. Lots of men shared with me that it was difficult for them to tell the truth if they saw that it would hurt a loved one. Significantly, the lying many boys learn to do to avoid hurting mom or whomever becomes so habitual that it becomes hard for them to distinguish a lie from the truth. This behavior carries over into adulthood. Often, men who would never think of lying in the workplace lie constantly in intimate relationships. This seems to be especially the case for heterosexual men who see women as gullible. Many men confess that they lie because they can get away with it. Their lies are forgiven. To understand why male lying is more accepted in our lives, we have to understand the way in which power and privilege are accorded men simply because they are males within a patriarchal culture. The very concept of, quote, being a man and, quote, a real man has always implied that when necessary, men can take actions that break the rules, that is above the law. Patriarchy tells us daily through movies, television, and magazines that men of power can do whatever they want. That it's this freedom that makes them men. The message given males is that to be honest is to be soft. The ability to be dishonest and indifferent to the consequences makes a male hard. Separates the men from the boys. John Stoltenberg's book, The End of Manhood, a book for men of conscience, analyzes the extent to which the masculine identity offered men as the ideal in patriarchal culture is one that requires all males to invent and invest in a false self. From the moment little boys are taught they should not cry or express hurt, feelings of loneliness or pain, that they must be tough, they are learning how to mask true feelings. In worst-case scenarios, they are learning how to not feel anything ever. These lessons are usually taught to males by other males and sexist mothers. Even boys raised in the most progressive, loving households, where parents encourage them to express emotions, learn a different understanding about masculinity and feelings on the playground, in the classroom, playing sports, or watching television. They may end up choosing patriarchal masculinity to be accepted by other boys and affirmed by male authority figures. In his important work, Rediscovering Masculinity, Victor Seidler stresses, when we learn to use language as boys, We very quickly learn how to conceal ourselves through language. We learn to, quote, master language so that we can control the world around us. Even though we learn to blame others for our unhappiness and misery in relationships, we also know at some unspoken level how our masculinity has been limited and injured as we touch the hurt and pain of realizing how little we seem to feel about anything. Estrangement from feelings makes it easier for men to lie because they are often in a trance state, utilizing survival strategies of asserting manhood that they learned as boys. This inability to connect with others carries with it an inability to assume responsibility for causing pain. This denial is most evident in cases where men seek to justify extreme violence toward those less powerful, usually women, by suggesting they are the ones who are really victimized by females. Regardless of the intensity of the male masquerade, inwardly many men see themselves as the victims of lovelessness. Like everyone, they learned as children to believe that love would be present in their lives. Although so many boys are taught to behave as though love does not matter, in their hearts they yearn for it. That yearning does not go away simply because they become men. Lying, as one form of acting out, is a way they articulate ongoing rage at the failure of love's promise. To embrace patriarchy, they must actively surrender the longing to love. Patriarchal masculinity requires of boys and men not only that they see themselves as more powerful and superior to women, but that they do whatever it takes to maintain their controlling position. This is one of the reasons men, more so than women, use lying as a means of gaining power in relationships. A commonly accepted assumption in a patriarchal culture is that love can be present in a situation where one group or individual dominates another. Many people believe men can dominate women and children, yet still be loving. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung insightfully emphasized the truism that where the will to power is paramount, love will be lacking. Talk to any group of women about their relationships with men, no matter their race or class, and you will hear stories about the will to power, about the way men use lying, and that includes withholding information as a way to control and subordinate. It is no accident that greater cultural acceptance of lying in this society coincided with women gaining greater social equity. Early on in the feminist movement, women insisted that men had the upper hand because they usually controlled the finances. Now that women's earning power has greatly increased, though it is not on a par with men's, and women are more economically independent, men who want to maintain dominance must deploy more subtle means the same thing as subtler, and subtler is a word I can't say right now. Must deploy more subtle strategies to colonize and disempower them. Even the wealthiest professional women can be, quote, brought down by being in a relationship where she longs to be loved and is consistently lied to. To the degree that she trusts her male companion, lying and other forms of betrayal will most likely shatter her self-confidence and self-esteem. Subtler. There it is. It's back. It's back in the vocab, y'all. Allegiance to male domination requires of men who embrace this thinking, and many, if not most, do, that they maintain dominance over women, quote, by any means necessary. While much cultural attention is given to domestic violence and practically everyone agrees it is wrong for men to hit women as a way of subordinating us, most men use psychological terrorism as a way to subordinate women. This is a socially acceptable form of coercion, and lying is one of the most powerful weapons in this arsenal. When men lie to women presenting a false self, the terrible price they pay to maintain, quote, power over us is the loss of their capacity to give and receive love. Trust is the foundation of intimacy. When lies erode trust, genuine connection cannot take place. While men who dominate others can and do experience ongoing care, they place a barrier between themselves and the experience of love. All visionary male thinkers challenging male domination insist that men can return to love only by repudiating the will to dominate. In The End of Manhood, Stoltenberg continually emphasizes that men can honor their own selfhood only through loving justice. He asserts, justice between people is perhaps the most important connection people can have. Loving justice for themselves and others enables men to break the chokehold of patriarchal masculinity. In the chapter titled, quote, How Can We Have Better Relationships with the Women in Our Lives?, Stoltenberg writes, "Loving justice between a man and a woman does not stand a chance when other men's manhood matters more. When a man has decided to love manhood more than justice, there are predictable consequences in all his relationships with women. Learning to live as a man of conscience means deciding that your loyalty to the people whom you love is always more important than whatever lingering loyalty you may sometimes feel to other men's judgment on your manhood. When men and women are loyal to ourselves and others, when we love justice, we understand fully the myriad ways in which lying diminishes and erodes the possibility of meaningful caring connection that it stands in the way of love. Since the values and behavior of men are usually the standards by which everyone in our culture determines what is acceptable, it is important to understand that condoning lying is an essential component of patriarchal thinking for everyone. Men are by no means the only group who use lies as a way of gaining power over others. Indeed, if patriarchal masculinity estranges men from their selfhood, it is equally true that women who embrace patriarchal femininity, the insistence that females should act as though they are weak, incapable of rational thought, dumb, silly, and are also socialized to wear a mask, to lie. This is one of the primary themes in Lerner's The Dance of Deception. With shrewd insight, she calls women to account for our participation in structures of pretense and lies, particularly within family life. Women are often comfortable lying to men in order to manipulate them to give us things we feel we want or deserve. We may lie to bolster a male's self-esteem. These lies may take the form of pretending to feel emotions we do not feel, to pretending levels of emotional vulnerability and neediness that are false. Heterosexual women are often schooled by other women in the art of lying to men as a way to manipulate. Many examples of the support females receive for lying concern the desire to mate and bear children. When I longed to have a baby and my male partner at the time was not ready, I was stunned by the number of women who encouraged me to disregard his feelings, to go ahead without telling him. They felt it was fine to deny a child the right to be desired by both female and male biological parents. No deception is involved when a woman has a child with a sperm donor, as in such a case there is no visible male parent to reject or punish an unwanted child. It disturbed me that women I respected did not take the need for male parenting seriously, or believe that it was important for a man to want to parent as a woman. Whether we like it or not, we still live in a world where children want to know who their fathers are, and when they can, go in search of absent fathers. I could not imagine bringing a child into this world whose father might reject him or her because he did not desire a child in the first place. Growing up in the 50s, in the days before adequate birth control, every female was acutely conscious of the way unwanted pregnancies could alter the course of a young woman's life. Still, it was clear then that there were girls who hoped for pregnancy to emotionally bind individual males to them forever. I thought those days were long gone. Yet even in this era of social equality between the sexes, I hear stories of females choosing to get pregnant when a relationship is rocky, as a way of forcing the male to remain in their life, or in the hope of forcing marriage. More than we might think, some men feel extremely bound to a woman when she gives birth to a child they have fathered. The fact that men succumb to being lied to and manipulated when the issue is biological parenting does not make it right or just. Men who accept being lied to and manipulated are not only abdicating their power, they are setting up a situation where they can, quote, blame women or justify woman hating. This is another case where lying is used to gain power over someone, to hold them against their will. Harriet Lerner reminds readers that honesty is only one aspect of truth-telling, that it is equated with, quote, moral excellence and absence of deception or fraud. The mask of patriarchal femininity often renders women's deceptions acceptable. However, when women lie, we lend credence to age-old sexist stereotypes that suggest women are inherently, by virtue of being female, less capable of truth-telling. The origins of this sexist stereotype extend back to ancient stories of Adam and Eve, of Eve's willingness to lie even to God. Often, when information is withheld by women and men, protection of privacy is the justification. In our culture, privacy is often confused with secrecy. Open, honest, truth-telling individuals value privacy. We all need spaces where we can be alone with thoughts and feelings, where we can experience healthy psychological autonomy and can choose to share when we want to. Keeping secrets is usually about power, about hiding and concealing information. Hence, many recovery programs stress that you are only as sick as your secrets. When a former boyfriend's sister, shared with me a carefully guarded family secret regarding incest, which he did not know about, I responded by requesting that she tell him. If she didn't, I would. I felt that keeping this information a secret from him would violate the commitment we had made as a couple to be open and honest with each other. By withholding this information from him, joining his mother and sisters, I would have been participating in family dysfunction. That's the most real shit, by the way. I gotta say, my wife and I have been together for over 20 years. And the time that I knew that she could hang was when my mother tried to get her, or I think it was either my mother or grandmother, tried to get her in on a very similar like family secret type situation, don't tell him type thing. And she just like, first time was just like, whatever you tell me, I'm going to tell your son. We don't have that kind of thing. Just know that. If you're speaking to me, you might as well be speaking to him. I don't keep secrets. That shit right there, absolutely foundational, fundamental, the most important shit. And if you're breaking a cycle of fucking generational trauma with your dysfunctional family, it's not optional. It must exist. It must happen. This chapter is resonating. Sharing with him affirmed my loyalty and respect for his capacity to cope with reality. While privacy strengthens all our bonds, secrecy weakens and damages connection. Lerner points out that we do not usually know the emotional costs of keeping a secret until the truth is disclosed. Usually, secrecy involves lying, and lying is always the setting for potential betrayal and violation of trust. Widespread cultural acceptance of lying is a primary reason many of us will never know love. It is impossible to nurture one's own or another spiritual growth when the core of one's being and identity is shrouded in secrecy and lies. Trusting that another person always intends your good, having a core foundation of loving practice, cannot exist within a context of deception. It is this truism that makes all acts of judicious withholding major moral dilemmas. More than ever before, we as a society need to renew a commitment to truth-telling. Such a commitment is difficult when lying is deemed more acceptable than telling the truth. Lying has become so much the accepted norm that people lie even when it would be simpler to tell the truth. Practically every mental health care practitioner, from the most erudite psychoanalysts to untrained self-help gurus, tell us that it is infinitely more fulfilling and we are all saner if we tell the truth, yet most of us are not rushing to stand up and be counted among the truth tellers. Indeed, as someone committed to being honest in daily life, I experience the constant drag of being seen as a freak for telling the truth, even when I speak truthfully about simple matters. If a friend gives me a gift and asks me to tell him or her whether or not I like it, I will respond honestly and judiciously. That is to say, I will speak the truth in a positive, caring manner. Yet even in this situation, the person who asks for honesty will often express annoyance when given a truthful response. In today's world, we are taught to fear the truth, to believe it always hurts. We are encouraged to see honest people as naive, as potential losers, bombarded with cultural propaganda ready to instill in all of us the notion that lies are more important, that truth does not matter. We are all potential victims. Consumer culture in particular encourages lies. Advertising is one of the cultural mediums that has most sanctioned lying. Keeping people in a constant state of lack, in perpetual desire, strengthens the marketplace economy. Lovelessness is a boon to consumerism, and lies strengthen the word of predatory advertising. Our passive acceptance of lies in public life, particularly via the mass media, upholds and perpetuates lying in our private lives. In our public life, there would be nothing for tabloid journalism to expose if we lived our lives out in the open, committed to truth-telling. Commitment to knowing love can protect us by keeping us wedded to a life of truth, willing to share ourselves openly and fully in both private and public life. To know love, We have to tell the truth to ourselves and to others. Creating a false self to mask fears and insecurities has become so common that many of us forget who we are and what we feel underneath the pretense. Breaking through this denial is always the first step in uncovering our longing to be honest and clear. Lies and secrets burden us and cause stress. When an individual has always lied, he has no awareness that truth-telling can take away this heavy burden. To know this, he must let the lies go. When feminism first began, women talked openly about our desires to know men better, to love them for who they really are. We talked about our desires to be loved for who we really are, i.e., to be accepted in our physical and spiritual beings rather than feeling we had to make ourselves into a fantasy self or become the object of male desire. And we urged men to be true to themselves, to express themselves. Then when men began to share their thoughts and feelings, some women could not cope. They wanted the old lies and pretenses to be back in place. In the 70s, a popular Sylvia greeting card showed a woman seated in front of a fortune teller, gazing into a crystal ball. The caption on the front of the card read, "He never talks about his feelings." On the inside, the response was, "Next year at 2 p.m., men will start talking about their feelings, and at 2:05, women all over America will be sorry." When we hear another person's thoughts, beliefs, and feelings, it is more difficult to project onto them our perceptions of who they are. It is harder to be manipulative. At times, women find it difficult to hear what many men have to say when what they tell us does not conform to our fantasies of who they are or who we want them to be. The wounded child inside many males is a boy who, when he first spoke his truths, was silenced by paternal sadism, by a patriarchal world that did not want him to claim his true feelings. The wounded child inside many females is a girl who was taught from early childhood on that she must become something other than herself, deny her true feelings in order to attract and please others. When men and women punish each other for truth-telling, we reinforce the notion that lies are better. To be loving, we willingly hear each other's truths and, most important, we affirm the value of truth-telling. Lies may make people feel better, but they do not help them to know love. Boom. Bell goes off. Bell really does go off. I talked on Political Stream a little while ago about how valuable the lessons of feminism have been to me when it comes to the personal being political, and how it's really the opposite of what a lot of people think a political conversation is, or how it goes much deeper than people think. Like, for example, I just like, as we sit here and just like read this about lying and like, you know what I mean? Did you, I personally, when I think of patriarchy, when I think of male domination, I don't immediately go to like, yeah, men lie all the time, or men, or like the ways in which people lie in relationships. That there's a political aspect, that there's a power component, that it upholds a system. It's crazy, because this is the shit you think is like your most personal, intimate shit. That's why you should read some feminist theory, y'all. Chapter 4. Commitment. Let love be love in me. Here's a quote from M. Scott Peck. Commitment is inherent in any genuinely loving relationship. Anyone who is truly concerned for the spiritual growth of another knows, consciously or instinctively, that he or she can significantly foster that growth only through a relationship of constancy. Oh, we talking about commitment? All right. Commitment to truth-telling lays the groundwork for the openness and honesty that is the heartbeat of love. When we can see ourselves as we truly are and accept ourselves, we build the necessary foundation for self-love. We have all heard the maxim, if you do not love yourself, you will be unable to love anyone else. It sounds good. Yet more often than not, we feel some degree of confusion when we hear this statement. The confusion arises because most people who think they are not lovable have this perception because at some point in their lives they were socialized to see themselves as unlovable by forces outside their control. We are not born knowing how to love anyone, either ourselves or somebody else. However, we are born able to respond to care. As we grow, we can give and receive attention, affection, and joy. Whether we learn how to love ourselves and others will depend on the presence of a loving environment. Self-love, sorry. Recently had an experience of broken trust where someone kept information from me, and it was so heartbreaking for me. And it's truly illuminating as to why it sucks so very, very hard. Yeah. I mean, the other reason that I love this sort of writing and thinking and work is, you may be looking at like international politics and you're just like, what the fuck can I do? Or you may feel exasperated and despair at your inability to change certain external factors that you think of as political. But when you start talking about this type of stuff, it's like, oh, I have a million things I could do, and I have a million relationships in which I could work on this, and I could be better. And if I could be better and I could help others be better in my immediate social, you start thinking about your mom, your dad, your sister, whoever you think about, whoever you have these bonds with. It's always actionable. It's always accessible. It's always immediate. Because if you think that personal is political and you're upset politically about the world you're in, isn't it great to know that you can do personal work that is connected to all that stuff? Anyhow, all right. I got lost for a minute. We are not born knowing how to love anyone, either ourselves or somebody else. However, we are born able to respond to care. As we grow, we can give and receive attention, affection, and joy. Whether we learn how to love ourselves and others will depend on the presence of a loving environment. Self-love cannot flourish in isolation. It is no easy task to be self-loving. Simple axioms that make self-love sound easy only make matters worse. It leaves many people wondering why, if it is so easy, they continue to be trapped by feelings of low self-esteem or self-hatred. Using a working definition of love that tells us it is the action we take on behalf of our own or another's spiritual growth provides us with a beginning blueprint for working on the issue of self-love. When we see love as a combination of trust, commitment, care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility, we can work on developing these qualities, or if they are already a part of who we are, we can learn to extend them to ourselves. Many people find it helpful to critically examine the past, particularly childhood, to chart their internalization of messages that they were not worthy, not enough, that they were crazy, stupid, monstrous, and so on. Simply learning how we have acquired feelings of worthlessness rarely enables us to change things. It is usually only one stage in the process. I, like so many other people, have found it useful to examine negative thinking and behavioral patterns learned in childhood, particularly those shaping my sense of self and identity. However, this process alone did not ensure self-recovery. It was not enough. I share this because it is far too easy to stay stuck in simply describing, telling one story over and over again, which can be a way of holding on to grief about the past or holding on to a narrative that places blame on others. While it is important for us to understand the origins of fragile self-esteem, it is also possible to bypass this stage, identifying when and where we received negative socialization, and still create a foundation for building self-love. Individuals who bypass this stage tend to move on to the next stage, which is actively introducing into our lives constructive, life-affirming thought patterns and behavior. Whether a person remembers the details of being abused is not important. When the consequence of that abuse is a feeling of worthlessness, they can still engage in a process of self-recovery by finding ways to affirm self-worth. The wounded heart learns self-love by first overcoming low self-esteem. Nathaniel Branden's lengthy work, 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, highlights important dimensions of self-esteem. The practice of living consciously, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity. Living consciously means we think critically about ourselves and the world we live in. We dare to ask ourselves the basic questions: who, what, when, where, and why. Answering these questions usually provides us with a level of awareness that enlightens. Brandon contends to live consciously means to seek to be aware of everything that bears on our actions, purposes, values, and goals to the best of our ability, whatever that ability may be, and to behave in accordance with that which we see and know. To live consciously, we have to engage in critical reflection about the world we live in and know most intimately. Usually it is through reflection that individuals who have not accepted themselves make the choice to stop listening to negative voices within and outside the self that constantly reject and devalue them. Affirmations work for anyone striving for self-acceptance. Although I had for years been interested in therapeutic modes of healing and self-help, affirmations always seemed to me a bit corny. My sister, who was then working as a therapist in the field of chemical dependency, encouraged me to give affirmations a try to see if I would experience any concrete changes in my outlook. I wrote affirmations relevant to my daily life and began to repeat them in the morning as part of my daily meditations. At the top of my list was the declaration, "I'm breaking with old patterns and moving forward with my life." I not only found them to be a tremendous energy boost, a way to kick off the day by my accentuating the positive, I also found it useful to repeat them during the day if I felt particularly stressed or was falling into the abyss of negative thinking. Affirmations helped restore my emotional equilibrium. Self-acceptance is hard for many of us. There is a voice inside that is constantly judging, first ourselves and then others. That voice enjoys the indulgence of an endless negative critique. Because we have learned to believe negativity is more realistic, it appears more real than any positive voice. Once we begin to replace negative thinking with positive thinking, it becomes utterly clear that, far from being realistic, negative thinking is absolutely disenabling. When we are positive, we not only accept and affirm ourselves, we are able to affirm and accept others. The more we accept ourselves, the better prepared we are to take responsibility in all areas of our lives. Commenting on this third pillar of self-esteem, Brandon defines self-responsibility as the willingness to take responsibility for my actions and the attainment of my goals, for my life and well-being. Taking responsibility does not mean that we deny the reality of institutionalized injustice. For example, racism, sexism, and homophobia all create barriers and concrete incidents of discrimination. Simply taking responsibility does not mean that we can prevent discriminatory acts from happening, but we can choose how we respond to acts of injustice. Taking responsibility means that in the face of barriers, we still have the capacity to invent our lives, to shape our destinies in ways that maximize our well-being. Every day we practice this shape-shifting to cope with realities we cannot easily change. Many women are married to men who were unsupportive when they decided to further their educations. Most of these women did not leave the men in their lives. They engaged in constructive strategies of resistance. One woman I spoke with was inhibited because her husband worked in a plant and she felt uncomfortable having more education than he did. Yet she wanted to re-enter the workforce and needed an advanced degree to do so. She made the choice to take responsibility for her needs and desires, believing it would also enhance the well-being of her family. Returning to work boosted her self-esteem and changed the passive-aggressive rage and depression that had developed as a consequence of her isolation and stagnation. Making this decision and finding ways to realize it was not an easy process, however. Her husband and children were often disgruntled when her independence forced them to accept more household responsibility. In the long run, everyone benefited, and it goes without saying that these changes boosted her self-esteem in ways that showed her how self-love made it possible to extend herself in a constructive way to others. She was happier, and so were those around her. In order to make these changes, she had to make use of another vital aspect of self-esteem, self-assertiveness, defined by Brandon as the willingness to stand up for myself, to be who I am openly, to treat myself with respect in all human encounters. Since many of us were shamed in childhood, either in our families or of origin or in school settings, a learned pattern of going along with the program and not making a fuss is the course of action we most frequently choose as a way to avoid conflict. As children, conflict was often the setting for put-downs and humiliation, the place where we were shamed. Our attempts at self-assertion failed as an adequate defense. Many of us learned that passivity lessened the possibility of attack. Sexist socialization teaches females that self-assertiveness is a threat to femininity. Accepting this faulty logic lays the groundwork for low self-esteem. The fear of being self-assertive usually surfaces in women who have been trained to be good girls or dutiful daughters. In our childhood home, my brother was never punished for talking back. Asserting his opinions was a positive sign of manhood. When my sisters and I... Hold up. Yeah. Sorry for all the throat clearing. I'll mute and do a big good one. Yeah, new voice. Who this? Okay.
Holy Spirit, activate.
Oh, no.
Holy Spirit,
no. Oh, no.
activate.
No.
Holy Spirit, activate. 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 All right, let's go.
Yes. Welcome to my dressing room. Now I will do my vocal exercises.
Holy Spirit, activate.
Oh, no.
Holy Spirit,
no. Oh, no.
activate. Holy Spirit, activate. 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 All right, let's go.
No, it's good. It's good. I needed a drink break. I've lost where I was on the page, though. Here we go. Sexist socialization teaches females that self-assertiveness is a threat to femininity. Accepting this faulty logic lays the groundwork for low self-esteem. The fear of being self-assertive usually surfaces in women who have been trained to be good girls or dutiful daughters. In our childhood home, my brother was never punished for talking back. Asserting his opinion was a positive sign of manhood. When my sisters and I voiced our opinions, we were told by our parenting adults that this was negative and undesirable behavior. We were told, especially by our dad, that female self-assertion was not feminine. We did not listen to these warnings. Even though ours was a patriarchal household, the fact that females far outnumbered the two males, my dad and my brother, made it safe for us to speak our minds, to talk back. Luckily, by the time we were young adults, the feminist movement had come along and validated that having a voice and being self-assertive was necessary for building self-esteem. One reason women have traditionally gossiped more than men is because gossip has been a social interaction wherein women have felt comfortable stating what they really think and feel. Often, rather than asserting what they think at the appropriate moment, women say what they think will please the listener. Later, they gossip, stating at that moment their true thoughts. This division between a false self invented to please others and a more authentic self need not exist when we cultivate positive self-esteem. The feminist movement really helped women understand the personal power that is gained through positive self-assertiveness. Gloria Steinem's bestseller Revolution from Within cautioned women about the danger of achieving success without doing the necessary groundwork for self-love and self-esteem. She found that achieving women who still suffered internalized self-hatred invariably acted out in ways that undermined their success. And if the self-hating, successful person did not act out, she may have lived a life of private desperation, unable to tell anyone success does not, in fact, reverse crippled self-esteem. To complicate matters, women may feel the need to pretend that they are self-loving, to assert confidence and power to the outside world, and as a consequence they feel psychologically conflicted and disengaged from their true being. Shamed by the feeling that they can never let anyone know who they really are, they may choose isolation and aloneness for fear of being unmasked. This is true of men as well. When powerful men reach the height of personal achievement in their careers, they often undermine all they have worked for by engaging in self-destructive behavior. Really? Men who reside at the bottom of our nation's economic totem pole do this, and so do men at the top. President Clinton engaged in deceitful behavior, betraying both his personal commitments to his family as well as his political commitment to be a paragon of American values to the people of this country. He did so when his popularity was at an all-time high. Having spent much of his life achieving against the odds, his actions expose a fundamental flaw in his self-esteem. Although he is a white male, Ivy League educated and economically well-off, privileged with all the accompanying perks, his irresponsible actions were a way of unmasking, of showing to the world that he really was not the, quote, good guy he was pretending to be. He created the context for a public shaming that no doubt mirrors moments of childhood shaming when some authority figure in his life made him feel he was worthless and that he would never be worthy no matter what he did. Anyone who suffers from low self-esteem can learn by his example. If we succeed without confronting and changing shaky foundations of low self-esteem rooted in contempt and hatred, we will falter along the way. That's an interesting concept for a lot of high-profile misbehavior. It is no accident that living purposefully is the sixth element of self-esteem. According to Brandon, it entails taking responsibility for consciously creating goals, identifying the actions necessary to achieve them, making sure our behavior is in alignment with our goals, and paying attention to the outcome of our actions so that we see whether they are leading us where we want to go. Most people are concerned about living purposefully when it comes to choosing the work we do. Unfortunately, many workers feel they have very little freedom of choice when it comes to work. Most people do not grow up learning that the work we choose to do will have a major impact on our capacity to be self-loving. Work occupies much of our time. Doing work we hate assaults our self-esteem and self-confidence. Yet most workers cannot do the work they love. But we can all enhance our capacity to live purposefully by learning how to experience satisfaction in whatever work we do. We find that satisfaction by giving any job total commitment. When I had a teaching job I hated, the kind of job where you long to be sick so you have an excuse for not going to work, the only way I could ease the severity of my pain was to give my absolute best. This strategy enabled me to live purposefully. Doing a job well, even if we do not enjoy what we are doing, means that we leave it with a feeling of well-being, our self-esteem intact. That self-esteem aids us when we go in search of a job that can be more fulfilling. Throughout my life, I have endeavored to not only do work I enjoy, but to work with individuals I respect, like, or love. When I first declared my desire to work in a loving environment, friends acted as though I had truly lost my mind. That's a great sentence. When I first declared my desire to work in a loving environment, friends acted as though I had truly lost my mind. To them, love and work did not go together. But I was convinced that I would work better in a work environment shaped by an ethic of love. Today, as the Buddhist concept of right livelihood is more widely understood, more people embrace the belief that work that enhances our spiritual well-being strengthens our capacity to love. And when we work with love, we create a loving working environment. Whenever I enter an office, I can immediately sense by the overall atmosphere and mood whether the workers like what they do. Marcia Sinitar writes about this concept in her book, Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow, as a way to encourage readers to take the risk of choosing work they care about and therefore learning through experience the meaning of right livelihood. While there are many meaningful insights in Sinitar's book, it is equally true that we can do what we love and money will not always follow. Although this is utterly disappointing, it can also offer us the experiential awareness that doing what you love may be more important than making money. Sometimes, as has been the case in my life, I have had to work at a job that is less than enjoyable in order to have the means to do the work I love. At one point in a very mixed job career, I worked as a cook in a club. I hated the noise and the smoke, but working nights left me free to write in the day and to do the work I truly wanted to do. Each experience enhanced the value of the other. My nighttime work helped me relish the quiet serenity of my day and enjoy the alone time so essential to writing. Whenever possible, it is best to seek work we love and to avoid work we hate. But sometimes we learn what we need to avoid by doing it. Individuals who are able to be economically self-sufficient doing what they love are blessed. Their experience serves as a beacon to all of us, showing us the ways right livelihood can strengthen self-love, ensuring peace and contentment in the lives we lead beyond work. Often, workers believe that if their home life is good, it does not matter if they feel dehumanized and exploited on the job. Many jobs undermine self-love because they require that workers constantly prove their worth. Individuals who are dissatisfied and miserable on the job bring this negative energy home. Clearly, much of the violence in domestic life, both physical and verbal abuse, is linked to job misery. We can encourage friends and loved ones to move toward greater self-love by supporting them in any effort to leave work that assaults their well-being. Folks who are out on the paid workforce, women and men who do unpaid work in the home, as well as all other happily employed people, are often doing what they want to do. While they are not rewarded by an income, their day-to-day life often provides more satisfaction than it would if they worked at a high-paying job in a stressful and dehumanizing environment. Satisfied homemakers, both women and the rare men who have chosen to stay home, have a lot to teach us all about the joy that comes from self-determination. They are their own bosses, setting the terms of their labor and the measure of their reward. More than any of us, they have the freedom to develop right livelihood. Wait, that's me. I have to develop a right livelihood. I have to do work I love? I love this, though. Hey, what's going on? What's happening, chat? What's up, Weetabix? We're doing work we love over here. Trying to be more loving. Most of us did not learn when we were young that our capacity to be self-loving would be shaped by the work we do and whether that work enhances our well-being. No wonder, then, that we have become a nation where so many workers feel bad. Jobs depress the spirit. Rather than enhancing self-esteem, work is perceived as a drag, a negative necessity. Bringing love into the work environment can create the necessary transformation that can make any job we do, no matter how menial, a place where workers can express the best of themselves. When we work with love, we renew the spirit. That renewal is an act of self-love. It nurtures our growth. It's not what you do, but how you do it. In the Knitting Sutra, Susan Linden describes the labor of knitting as a freely chosen craft that enhances her awareness of the value of right livelihood. Sharing, "What I found in this tiny domestic world of knitting is endless. It runs broader and deeper than anyone might imagine. It is infinite and seemingly inexhaustible in its capacity to inspire, excite, and provoke creative insight." Linden sees the world that we have traditionally thought of as woman's work as a place to discover godliness through the act of creating domestic bliss. A blissful household is one where love can flourish. Creating domestic bliss is especially useful for individuals living alone who are just learning to be self-loving. When we intentionally strive to make our homes places where we are ready to give and receive love, every object we place there enhances our well-being. I create themes for my different homes. Okay, bell hooks. Hold up. Bell Hooks creates themes for her different homes, y'all. My flat in the city has the theme, Love's Meeting Place. As a small-town person moving to a big city, I found that I needed my environment to truly feel like a sanctuary. Since my one-bedroom flat is so much smaller than the places I had been accustomed to living in, I decided to take only objects I truly loved, the things I felt I could not do without. It is amazing how much stuff you can just let go of. My country place has a desert theme. I call it Soledad Hermosa, beautiful solitude. I go there to be quiet and still and to experience the divine, to be renewed. Of all the chapters for this book, this one was the most difficult to write. When I talked with friends and acquaintances about self-love, I was surprised to see how many of us feel troubled by the notion, as though the very idea implies too much narcissism or selfishness. We all need to rid ourselves of misguided notions about self-love. We need to stop fearfully equating it with self-centeredness and selfishness. Self-love is the foundation of our loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. Giving ourselves love, we provide our inner being with the opportunity to have the unconditional love we may have always longed to receive from someone else. Whenever we interact with others, the love we give and receive is always necessarily conditional. Although it is not impossible, it is very difficult and rare for us to be able to extend unconditional love to others, largely because we cannot exercise control over the behavior of someone else, and we cannot predict or utterly control our responses to their actions. We can, however, exercise control over our own actions. we can give ourselves the unconditional love that is the grounding for sustained acceptance and affirmation. When we give this precious gift to ourselves, we are able to reach out to others from a place of fulfillment and not from a place of lack. One of the best guides to how to be self-loving is to give ourselves the love we are often dreaming about receiving from others. There was a time when I felt lousy about my over 40 body, saw myself as too fat, too this or too that, yet I fantasized about finding a lover who would give me the gift of being loved as I am. It is silly, isn't it, that I would dream of someone else offering to me the acceptance and affirmation I was withholding from myself. This was a moment when the maxim, "you can never love anybody if you are unable to love yourself," made clear sense, and I add, do not expect to receive the love from someone else you do not give yourself. In an ideal world, we would all learn in childhood to love ourselves. We would grow being insecure in our worth and value, spreading love wherever we went, letting our light shine. If we did not learn self-love in our youth, there is still hope. The light of love is always in us, no matter how cold the flame. It is always present, waiting for the spark to ignite, waiting for the heart to awaken and call us back to the first memory of being the life force inside a dark place, waiting to be born, waiting to see the light. Chapter 5. I mean, Bell Hooks was chilling. Slotho. It is part of the Eightfold Path, right? I mean, it worked out for Bell. Bell had 2 houses. Had the Soledad Hermosa. I love that for Bell. She worked hard. She had an incredible life. She did great works. And apparently she got that paper a little bit. Honestly, I think it's because she may have been teaching in 2 different places, which required her to have 2 different residences. I don't know. Okay. Spirituality. This might be our last chapter. I might call it after this. I'm scared of this one. So Bell Hooks was a black thinker and black revolutionary, and maybe she'll get into it in this chapter, but that history is very much rooted in spirituality. That's always the interesting part for me. Sometimes I find deep meaning. Sometimes I glaze over these parts and just understand. Cornel West is a similar cat. And I find that I resonate with the language even without the belief sometimes. And I think these are modern enough writers and thinkers that they also understand that. My place is looking nice, right? It's amazing how the snow just falls continuously like that. But we'll see. We'll see what we get. Spirituality, divine love. Saint Teresa of Avila said, "As a woman and a lover, however, I am moved by the sight of my beloved. Where he is, I want to be. What he suffers, I want to share. Who he is, I want to be. Crucified for love." Living life in touch with divine spirit lets us see the light of love in all living beings. That light is a resurrecting life force. A culture that is dead to love can only be resurrected by spiritual awakening. On the surface, it appears that our nation has gone so far down the road of secular individualism, worshiping the twin gods of money and power, that there seems to be no place for spiritual life. Yet an overwhelming majority of Americans who express faith in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, or other religious traditions clearly believe that spiritual life is important. The crisis of American life does not seem to be generated by a lack of interest in spirituality. However, this interest is constantly co-opted by the powerful forces of materialism and hedonistic consumerism. In the conclusion to his insightful work, The Art of Loving, written in the mid-50s but still relevant to today's world, psychoanalyst Erich Fromm courageously calls attention to the reality that the principle underlying capitalistic society and the principle of love are incompatible. He contends, our society is run by a managerial bureaucracy, by professional politicians. People are motivated by mass suggestion. Their aim is producing more and consuming more as purposes in themselves. The cultural emphasis on endless consumption deflects attention from spiritual hunger. We are endlessly bombarded by messages telling us that our every need can be satisfied by material increase. Artist Barbara Kruger created a work proclaiming, "I shop, therefore I am," to show the way consumerism has taken over mass consciousness, making people think that they are what they possess. While the zeal to possess intensifies, so does the sense of spiritual emptiness. Because we are spiritually empty, we try to fill up on consumerism. We may not have enough love, but we can always shop. Our national spiritual hunger springs from a keen awareness of the emotional lack in our lives. It is a response to lovelessness. Going to church or temple has not satisfied this hunger, surfacing from deep within our souls. Organized religion has failed to satisfy spiritual hunger because it has accommodated secular demands, interpreting spiritual life in ways that uphold the values of a production-centered commodity culture. This is as true of the traditional Christian church as it is of New Age spirituality. It is no accident that so many famous New Age spiritual teachers link their teachings to a metaphysics of daily life that extols the virtues of wealth, privilege, and power. For example, consider New Age logic, which suggests that the poor have chosen to be poor, have chosen their suffering. Such thinking removes from all of us who are privileged the burden of accountability. Rather than calling us to embrace love and greater community, it actually requires an investment in the logic of alienation and estrangement. The basic interdependency of life is ignored so that separateness and individual gain can be deified. Religious fundamentalism is often represented as authentic spiritual practice and given a level of mass media exposure that countercultural religious thought and practice never receive. Usually, fundamentalists, be they Christian, Muslim, or any faith, shape and interpret religious thought to make it conform to and legitimize a conservative status quo. Fundamentalist thinkers use religion to justify supporting imperialism, militarism, sexism, racism, homophobia. They deny the unifying message of love that is at the heart of every major religious tradition. Okay, Bell. All right. I like this. No wonder then that so many people who claim to believe in religious teachings do not allow their habits of being to reflect these beliefs. For example, the Christian church remains one of the most racially segregated institutions in our society. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter to American Christians, in which he assumes the persona of the biblical apostle Paul, he admonishes believers for supporting segregation. Americans, I must urge you to be rid of every aspect of segregation. Segregation is a blatant denial of the unity which we have in Christ. It substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and relegates persons to the status of things. It scars the soul and degrades the personality. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. This is only one example of the way in which that's the end of the quote. This is only one example of the way in which organized religious worship corrupts and violates religious principles about how we should live in the world and how we should act toward one another. Imagine how different our lives would be if all the individuals who claim to be Christians or who claim to be religious were setting an example for everyone by being loving. Blatant misuses of spirituality and religious faith could lead us to despair about spiritual life if we were not simultaneously witnessing a genuine concern for spiritual awakening expressed counterculturally. Whether it is the American Buddhists working in solidarity to free Tibet, or the many Christian-based organizations that provide support in the way of food and shelter for the needy globally, these embodiments of loving practice renew our hope and restore the soul. All around the world, liberation theology offers the exploited and oppressed a vision of spiritual freedom that is linked to struggles to end domination. A little more than 10 years after Fromm first published The Art of Loving, Martin Luther King Jr.'s collection of sermons, Strength to Love, was published. The major focus of these talks was the celebration of love as a spiritual force that unites and binds all life. Like Fromm's earlier work, these essays champion spiritual life, critiquing capitalism, materialism, and the violence used to enforce exploitation and dehumanization. In a 1967 lecture, Opposing War, King declared, quote, "When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God." Throughout his life, King was a prophet of love. In the late 70s, when it was no longer cool to talk about spirituality, I found myself turning again and again to his work and to the work of Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton is a Catholic mystic, I believe. As religious seekers and thinkers, both men focused attention on the practice of love as a means of spiritual fulfillment. Extolling the transformative power of love in his essay Love and Need, Merton writes, "Love is, in fact, an intensification of life, a completeness, a fullness, a wholeness of life. Life curves upward to a peak of intensity, a high point of value and meaning, at which all its latent creative possibilities go into action and the person transcends himself or herself in encounter, response, and communion with another. It is for this that we came into the world, this communion and self-transcendence. We do not become fully human until we give ourselves to each other in love." The teachings about love offered by Fromm, King, and Merton differ from much of today's writing. There is always an emphasis in their work on love as an active force that should lead us into greater communion with the world. In their work, loving practice is not aimed at simply giving an individual greater life satisfaction. It is extolled as the primary way we end domination and oppression. This important politicization of love is often absent from today's writing. Much as I enjoy popular New Age commentary on love, I am often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement. I've seen this Bell Hooks quote before. I've seen this quote memed. It's a good one. Bell says, "Much as I enjoy popular New Age commentary on love, I am often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community. Packaged as a commodity, spirituality becomes no different from an exercise program. While it may leave the consumer feeling better about his or her life, its power to enhance our communion with ourselves and others in a sustained way is inhibited. Commenting on the value of an engaged life in the active life, wisdom for work, creativity, and caring, Parker Palmer writes, "To be fully alive is to act. I understand action to be any way that we can co-create reality with other beings and the spirit. Action, like a sacrament, is the visible form of an invisible spirit, an outward manifestation of an inward power. But as we act, we not only express what is in us and help give shape to the world, we also receive what is outside us and reshape our inner selves. A commitment to a spiritual life requires us to do more than read a good book or go on a restful retreat. It requires conscious practice, a willingness to unite the way we think with the way we act. Spiritual life is first and foremost about commitment to a way of thinking and behaving that honors principles of interbeing and interconnectedness. When I speak of the spiritual, I refer to the recognition within everyone that there is a place of mystery in our lives where forces that are beyond human desire or will alter circumstances and or guide and direct us. I call these forces divine spirit. When we choose to lead a spirit-filled life, we recognize and celebrate the presence of transcendent spirits. Some people call this presence soul, God, the beloved, higher consciousness, or higher power. Still others say that this force is what it is because it cannot be named. To them, it is simply the Spirit moving in us and through us. A commitment to spiritual life necessarily means we embrace the eternal principle that love is all, everything, our true destiny. Despite overwhelming pressure to conform to the culture of lovelessness, we still seek to know love. That seeking is itself a manifestation of divine spirit. Life-threatening nihilism abounds in contemporary culture, crossing the boundaries of race, class, gender, and nationality. At some point, it affects all our lives. Everyone I know is at times brought low by feelings of depression and despair about the state of the world. Whether it is the ongoing worldwide presence of violence, expressed by the persistence of man-made war, hunger, and starvation, the day-to-day reality of violence, the presence of life-threatening diseases that cause the unexpected deaths of friends, comrades, and loved ones, there is much that brings everyone to the brink of despair. Knowing love, or the hope of knowing love, is the anchor that keeps us from falling into that sea of despair. In A Path with Heart, Jack Kornfield shares, "The longing for love and the movement of love is underneath all our activities." Spirituality and spiritual life give us the strength to love. It is rare for individuals to choose a life in the spirit, one that honors the sacred dimensions of everyday life when they have had no contact with traditional religious thought or practice. Spiritual teachers are important guides who provide a catalyst for our spiritual awakening. Another source of spiritual growth is communion and fellowship with like-minded souls. Spiritual seekers let their light shine so that others may see, not only to give service by example, but also to constantly remind themselves that spirituality is most gloriously embodied in our actions, our habits of being. Insightfully, Jack Kornfield explains all other spiritual teachings are in vain if we cannot love. Even the most exalted states and the most exceptional spiritual accomplishments are unimportant if we cannot be happy in the most basic and ordinary ways. If with our hearts we cannot touch one another and the life we have been given, what matters is how we live. For many of us, church was the place where we first heard a counter-narrative of love, one that differed from the confused messages about love learned in dysfunctional families. The mystical dimensions of Christian faith, the belief that we are all one, that love is all, presented to me as a child in the church, were the space of redemption. At church, I learned not only to understand that God is love, I learned also that children were special in the heart and mind of divine spirit. Dreaming of becoming a writer, valuing the life of the mind above all things, it was especially awesome to learn by heart passages from 1 Corinthians, the love chapter. From childhood on, I have often reflected on the passage that proclaims, "If I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing." Throughout my graduate school years, as I worked hard to finish my doctorate, striving to maintain a commitment to spiritual life in a world that did not value the spiritual, I returned to these lessons about the primacy of love. The wisdom they convey kept me from hardening my heart. Remaining open to love was crucial to my academic survival. When the environment you live in and know most intimately does not place value on loving, a spiritual life provides a place of solace and renewal. Significantly, the gaining of knowledge about spirituality is not the same as a commitment to a spiritual life. Jack Kornfield testifies, "In undertaking a spiritual life, what matters is simple. We must make certain our path is connected with our heart. In beginning a genuine spiritual journey, we have to stay much closer to home, to focus directly on what is right here in front of us, to make sure that our path is connected with our deepest love. When we begin to experience the sacred in our everyday lives, we bring to mundane tasks a quality of concentration and engagement that lifts the spirit. We recognize divine spirit everywhere. This is especially true when we face difficulties. So many people turn to spiritual thinking only when they experience difficulties, hoping that the sorrow or pain will just miraculously disappear. Usually they find that the place of suffering, the place where we are broken in spirit, when accepted and embraced, is also a place of peace and possibility. Our sufferings do not magically end. Instead, we are able to wisely, alchemically recycle them. They become the abundant waste that we use to make new growth possible. That is why biblical scripture admonishes us to count it all joy when we meet various trials. Learning to embrace our suffering is one of the gifts offered by spiritual life and practice. Spiritual practice does not need to be connected to organized religion in order to be meaningful. Some individuals find their sacred connection to life communing with the natural world and engaging in practices that honor life-sustaining ecosystems. We can meditate, pray, go to temple, church, mosque, or create a quiet sanctuary where we live to commune with holy spirits. To some folks, daily service to others is affirmative spiritual practice, one that expresses their love for others. When we make a commitment to staying in touch with divine forces that inform our inner
Holy
and outer
Spirit,
world.
activate.
Oh, no.
Holy
Oh, no.
Spirit,
Oh, no.
activate.
We're activating the Holy Spirit?
Activate. 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 All right, let's go.
When we activate the Holy Spirit, I'll give it to you. I'll give you that one, Powerful Con. It had to happen. I study spiritual teachings as a guide for reflection and action. Countercultural spiritual awakening is visible in books and magazines and in small circles where individuals come to celebrate and commune with the divine. Fellowship with other seekers after truth offers essential inspiration. Since the earliest roots of my spiritual practice were in the Christian tradition, I still find the traditional church to be a place of worship, a place for worship and fellowship, and I also participate in a Buddhist practice. I meditate and pray. Everyone has to choose the spiritual practice that best enhances their life. This is why progressive seekers after truth urge us all to be tolerant, to remember that though our paths are many, we are made one community in love. The spiritual awakening that is slowly taking place counterculturally will become more of a daily norm as we all willingly break mainstream cultural taboos that silence or erase our passion for spiritual practice. For a long time, many of my friends and work peers had no idea I was devoted to a spiritual practice. Among progressive thinkers and scholars, it was much more hip, cool, and acceptable to express atheistic sentiments than to declare passionate devotion to divine spirit. I also did not want folks to think that if I talked about my spiritual beliefs, I was trying to convert them, to impose those beliefs on them in any way. I began to speak more openly about the place of spirituality in my life when witnessing the despair of my students, their sense of hopelessness, their fears that life is without meaning, their profound loneliness and lovelessness. When young, bright, beautiful students would come to my office and confess their despondency, I felt it was irresponsible to just listen and commiserate with their woes without daring to share how I had confronted similar issues in my life. Often they would urge me to tell them how I sustained my joy in living. To tell the truth, I had to be willing to talk openly about spiritual life, and I had to find a way to talk about my choices that did not imply that they would be correct or right choices for someone else. My belief that God is love, that love is everything, our true destiny, sustains me. I affirm these beliefs through daily meditation and prayer, through contemplation and service, through worship and loving kindness. In the Introduction to Loving Kindness, Sharon Salzberg teaches that the Buddha described spiritual practice as the liberation of the heart, which is love. She urges us to remember that spiritual practice helps us overcome the feeling of isolation, which uncovers the radiant, joyful heart within each of us and manifests this radiance to the world. Everyone needs to be in touch with the needs of their spirit. This connectedness calls us to spiritual awakening, to love. In the biblical book of John, a passage reminds us that anyone who does not know love is still in death. All awakening to love is spiritual awakening. And that's the end of the chapter. Chapter 6 is where I might leave it. Yeah, it looks like there's 12 chapters, so it looks like we might have hit the halfway mark. Right? I was planning on doing this in 2 streams. And I think we're pretty good.